I'd just like to welcome everybody on behalf of Catholic Earth Care Australia. It's just so fantastic to have a really broad, inclusive conversation. The Catholic Earth Care journey, or the steps through this month of September, is aligned to what we call our season of creation. I think it was back in 1979, the Patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church asked the Christian world to have one day of the year where they'd pray for creation, and it has grown now to include 2.3 billion Christians praying for creation through the season of creation. And this dialogue is about not just a Catholic perspective, but taking perspectives from a worldview, from everyone's different faith perspectives that we could possibly be in contact with. And a number of you will be from the same faith background, but you will still come with slightly different perspectives on that again. And that's adds to the richness of the tapestry of this conversation. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Patricia Heinmarsh. Tricia is part of our Catholic Earth Care reference group since its inaugurations in 2002, going through to 2020, and has been also the Director of Catholic Education in Tasmania, as well as a consultant for education in Sydney and other locations. Welcome, Tricia, and thank you very much for hosting today's session.
Thank you, Bernard. So, Bernard, you're going to lead us in now with some slides after Cherie, is that right?
Yeah, we'll play a little video after Cherie has done Welcome to Country.
I'm doing acknowledgement to country.
Acknowledgement to country, sorry.
Welcome can only be done by a direct descendant of the land that you're on. And I'm currently on Wurundjeri land, so I can only do an acknowledgement to country. Okay, so I'm honoured to be here today for Catholic Earth Care, and I'd like to acknowledge that we live and conduct our business on the sacred land of the Aboriginal people in Australia. I'm particularly on the Kulin Nations. And we especially recognise that this land is as sacred today as it has been since time immemorial. I would like to pay our respects to the traditional custodians and thank them for caring for this land for thousands of years, so that we might enjoy its benefits today. And as we gather on this sacred land, let us acknowledge that we are standing on country for which the members and elders of the local Aboriginal community and their ancestors have been custodians for thousands and thousands of years, on which we have performed age-old ceremonies, celebrations, initiations, and renewals. We acknowledge their living culture and unique role in the life of this country. The Creator chose Aboriginal people to take care of this land, and our law was to sustain and nurture all that had been created. My ancestors have danced and sung the stories of all creation, proclaiming the sacredness of the gifts given to us by the Creator Spirit since the beginning of time. We've always lived in this great south land of the Holy Spirit. We've been here since there was a land bridge between the mainland and Tasmania, and our people walked that land bridge. We've lived through 3 ice ages. We survived the megafauna. They hunted us and we hunted them with spears and stone axes, and we survived. We have survived and we're still here today. We are the oldest, longest, continuous culture in the world today, something for us all to be very proud of. We are born the spirit of this country. It is where we're conceived from, it is our home, and it's where we belong. We have a totemic relationship with the birds and the animals, which connects us to both the physical world and the spiritual world. And that is underpinned by reciprocal obligation to care for each other and the natural environment. It is a birthright that has been handed down to our bloodlines from generation to generation. Our relationship with the land is at the centre of our lives. Our country is our mother. In a sense, our country is us. As a Queensland Mullaridgi and Okala woman, and on your behalf, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. We acknowledge the elders, past and present, and our youth as they hold our hopes for the future. This is holy land, and the great challenge to all newcomers to this land is to open your eyes and see the stories that have been written, to open your ears and hear the songs that have been sung, and to feel the sacredness on the land in which you are standing today. Thank you very much.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship so light, I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises so loud, so loud. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you say. If it all reveals in nature's soul alive, I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you so loud,
Thank you, Cherie, for that truly beautiful acknowledgement of country, and also very educational for us. I'd like to thank each one of you for making the time to be with us. We're building bridges this morning, ecological bridges, but bridges of understanding about our faiths, our rich faiths. And that idea of Jubilee that was in the slides, it comes from the Old Testament, where Jubilee was a time that was set aside every 50 years, every 7 years, a subset, every 49 years, but the 50th year, to rest the earth. And this year, it's 50 years since the first official Earth Day. So that's why we picked up that theme of Jubilee. And the churches who work with Pope Francis to prepare the idea of season of creation, they suggested Jubilee for this year. So that's where that comes from. Now, we'd like to invite each of you, and Nagasuri, I've popped you in after Mitch. Sorry to miss you, but I'm going to ask each of you just to say a few little words about yourself by way of introduction. Cherie, we have heard something from you, but you might like to add to that, and we'll start with Cherie, and then we'll go to Mitch, and then Nagasuri, and so on. And I'll call you one by one. Thank you, Cherie.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Sherry Balcome. I'm the coordinator of the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry in Melbourne. I've been working for the ministry since 2003. and I've been the coordinator since 2015. I grew up in Melbourne, but all my people are from far north Queensland in Cairns, and I have strong connections with home. I have 4 children and 3 grandchildren, and I really enjoy my work. I do a lot of cross-cultural education with schools. We've initiated a number of programs and published a few books with the ministry. So, and we're very involved, I think, on a national level as well as a state level. So for us, it's about sharing our spirituality and showing people how it can easily meld with Christianity. And I feel very blessed to be able to be in the position that I am.
Thank you, Cherie. Mitch?
Hi, my name is Mitch. I'm, I guess, of the Jewish faith, Jewish people. I run an urban farm called Adamama. I've been doing it for about a year down in Paddington. It's a community project built on fostering identity with sustainable practices, connecting to food and culture and thousands of years of history and traditions, and how that interlinks into food production and outdoor education. We have like school groups and we used to have school groups coming through. But yeah, that's what we do. History and informal education. I've lived in Israel and England and now Australia, parts of America too, different points, doing different forms of informal education. Now I find myself here, settling down into a nice patch of land.
And Mitch, is that funded by through the Jewish community, the farm?
It is at the moment. Yeah, we're from
Yeah, thank you. Nagasuri?
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for the acknowledgement of country. I love to hear people of Aboriginal descent do it, and the inclusivity that you have. So thank you so much, and thank you for that beautiful filmic introduction. I mean, just touched my heart. And so I'm a Buddhist. I was born into a Presbyterian family that wasn't a deeply practicing Christian family. I found the Dharma in my late 40s as an academic. Had the very good fortune to be able to withdraw from paid employment before I was 50, and I've really been a Dharma practitioner, a Buddhist practitioner ever since. So I was ordained on a 7-week retreat in Italy in the year 2000, having joined the community in 89. And it's gone through my ordination training, of course, at that time. And I think what really attracted me to Buddhism were their ethical guidelines, their ethical precepts, and their concern for all living beings. So to be invited onto this panel is something that, you know, really does touch my heart. And I teach the Dharma, facilitate study groups, meditate, etc. We own our own retreat centre out at Vijayaloka. Sorry, this is in Sydney, so out near Campbelltown. And the thing to go slower in the film, I sort of thought, oh yes, if we could only all go a bit slower.
Thank you so much, Nagasuri. Fahimah, could you turn your speaker? Yes, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Fahimah. I'm zooming in from Bijagal country in the southeast of Sydney. I grew up in Malaysia and I came to Australia for university, and I'm currently running my own architecture practice that focuses on low carbon and energy efficient buildings. I'm also on the management committee and the Sydney convener for the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change. And I think the way that I interpret my faith is that there is kind of like personal spiritual development, but also kind of there is an important aspect of it that is kind of like community work or involvement with the wider world, which and I strive to make positive climate decisions in my professional and my activist career. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a very wide variety of experience we have here, and to have someone who's an architect is particularly enriching, I think, Fahimah. Thank you. And Zuleyha, could we invite you next?
Yep. Hi, this is Zuleyha from Melbourne. So I've been in Melbourne for about 5 years. I was born in Sydney. So I'm an academic. I lecture in Islamic spirituality, and I think that's where my particular interest in the environment is, because I think when we view the world from a spiritual perspective, it really changes the way we do see things. And so, yeah, I would say that, yeah, the worldview is positively affected, and there's a connection that's, you know, I guess there's an affiliation that you feel for everything that's in your environment. And, you know, the topic of the environment and ecology and all, is very important to me. And recently I actually published a chapter on the topic of towards a just and ecologically sustainable peace in the book of Professor Joseph Camilleri and Dr. Deborah Guess. So that was an experience that I really enjoyed, a conference that we had where, again, seeing the common ground between the different faiths, and really that there is this drive with all faiths to protect the environment. And, you know, that's why a gathering like this is so important, because we're coming together with this strong resolution to do what we can to protect our environment.
Thank you so much, Zuleyha, and marvellous to have you with us to provide that perspective for us. We've just welcomed aboard Dianne, Dr. Dianne Rayson. And Dianne, you're very welcome. We're just doing a little whip around and introducing ourselves. So I'll get Andrew to introduce himself, and then you might follow Andrew just for a couple of minutes. So Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Knife. I am coming to you from Turrbal country in Brisbane, in Queensland. I come to this conversation from a very different background. I work for Caritas, who hold Catholic Earth Care as one of our areas. But I come from a family that was Christian for as long as any of us can remember. My father was an Anglican minister, and his before him. I spent a lot of time in sort of the charismatic churches and things like that. But for 7.5 years, I lived and worked in Ethiopia, running an aid and development project there, working with destitute families, families that were in all kinds of different awful situations, and trying to provide assistance and support to see those families become independent. So I guess I come into this conversation with a background that came more from social justice, and then led to being more informed about ecological justice. So yeah, I guess that's the brief version.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Di, you've got Di on your screen. Is it better to call you Di or Dianne? What would you prefer?
Absolutely, it's Di. Thanks, Trish, and hi everyone. I'm sorry for being late, but I'm so pleased to be part of this group. Sherry, I'm sorry I missed the welcome to country, but thank you. And I'm sitting here on Awabakal country, where I teach at University of Newcastle, but I live and work on Biripi country as well. That's where my home is. So I have kind of a couple of hats. I've had a long history in public health. And like Andrew, I've worked overseas for a long time in Papua New Guinea, in the highlands there with subsistence farmers for much of the 90s. And I came to theology just in this past decade, mostly out of my concern for the church's place in the public discussion around climate change. And I've always felt that people of faith should be at the front of that discussion, not being pulled along from behind. And so I figured out that I'd become part of that people at the front sort of pulling the church along. And so my roles now are in education and in working with the church around climate change.
That's marvellous. Thank you, Di. And we probably feel a little bit more at home with each other now, and it's not every day of the week we have this kind of opportunity to be in dialogue with people from such varied backgrounds. So it's really enriching. What we thought we'd do now, and I hope you've had a chance to have a look at those questions, but if not, don't worry. But I did send 3 questions as possible starting points, but the first one, I thought we might take that, and it's to ask ourselves what within my own tradition or within my own spirituality or my own meaning of life, if you don't share a particular faith perspective, but what within your own background how would you recognise the seasons, especially spring and new life, or celebrate the sanctity of all living things? Now, if you want to comment on a variation of that, that's fine. And if you do go off into something else, we'll understand that that's very dear to your heart. But just initially, if we could keep it to maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and we'll follow the order we followed before, just so we know where we're going. So, Cherie, could we ask you, please, you've probably opened some of this up for us already in your very beautiful acknowledgement of country, but we'll kick off with you, and then so that we're ready again, we'll have Mitch and then Nagasuri and so on. So thank you, Cherie.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, I think for Aboriginal culture, Australia-wide, you know, we are very, very different. Our ceremonies and rituals are so important to us, and we celebrate every change of season with rituals. And traditionally, those rituals and ceremonies are connected to our pride and dignity as a people. So, you know, it would mean shame on us if we did not perform particular ceremonies. And for Aboriginal people, we find everything sacred. The land, the water, the trees, the rocks, the mountains, they all have their own spirit. And we are part of that spirit. We're no better than the animals or the trees. And as I was saying, you know, in the acknowledgement, we consider the land to be alive. And so it's our obligation to take care of that. And I think, you know, Aboriginal people, we're the first eco warriors. We cared for country, you know, we used fire to rejuvenate. It was so important. And I can see now with things changing that we're starting to turn back towards that, which is a wonderful thing. I've actually been reading a lot about fire stick farming where, you know, we use fire to contain animals, to contain where they went. And because in Australia we have over 300 nations. So, you know, and we weren't allowed to go onto anybody else's country without permission, you know, so you couldn't go for miles running across country chasing a kangaroo. So we used ways to contain those animals so that we could harvest them easily without offence. And for us, you know, we have our connection to country is from birth, before birth. You know, we have our totemic relationship, which connects us with the spiritual, and they're, say, our guardian angels. They're our protectors, and they help to guide us. And, you know, like often different places have different rituals and ceremonies, but, you know, one of the big ones for birth is, you know, when a child's born, they're rolled in Mother Earth as soon as they're born so that they have that connection to country. And then they're taken to the waterways and they're washed in the waterways with the fresh water. So, you know, we've had that ceremony with us for thousands and thousands of years. And I think it's something that now we're starting to claim back a lot more because of our history of what's happened to us. We've had a lot of that taken away, but we're slowly starting to gain that back and to gain the strength. And I think the insight into how important that is to us as a people to be able to maintain our culture and to strengthen our ties with each other and with the land. You know, we're the ultimate fresh food people. We're here well before Woolworths. And, you know, but, you know, like we even had, well, we still have rituals for the killing of an animal to eat. You know, it would be done in a respectful manner. And then, you know, there would be particular parts that would be treated sacredly. Particular parts for members of the tribe, you know, for the elders, they would have the best, sweetest part. And then every part of that animal would be respected. It would be taken care of. Once it was, we would use the skin for blankets, we'd use the sinew for sewing. And then when we were finished with that animal, we would bury it back into Mother Earth so that the Creator Spirit would send another to replace that. So we have had this deep connection with God and with the land, and I think that's one of the reasons. You know, look, I really think God put us here to take care of Australia. Thank goodness. You know, I mean, poor America and Canada got 200 years on us, their First Nations, and you know, He was happy with what we were doing. We were caring for each other. We were respecting each other. We didn't need to have fences. We didn't need to have big, massive buildings, just like Jesus, you know. We didn't need that to be in touch with God. But we, you know, we did it in other ways, and we respected everything that was around us. So I think that was an incredible gift that's been given to Aboriginal people. So we're hoping, you know, we're building on that in the future. So I might let somebody else go now.
Thank you very much, Cherie. That's a marvellous start. And Mitch, what about your approach towards the seasons and the sacredness of life?
Well, I sit around winter and I hope for spring because it's cold and it's just all. I only eat veggies that we grow in the farm, so I'm so sick of kale and spinach and silver beets. So I'm just waiting for spring. But then I sit around all winter doing bits and bobs, and I get to spring and I forget how hard it is. So much work, a lot of physical work. So the transition of seasons is really obvious when you're working physically with the land. And that's where my connection, I guess, to the spirituality and faith comes, is that physical connection. Not, I mean, there's theoretical, but it's physical. And I really notice those seasons changing in the way that I work and how I bring people in. There's a sign at the entrance to the farm that says, which is from the book of Genesis. And it says, and God created humankind from the dust of the earth. And that's the first thing that people see when they walk in. And it's a quote that's really meaningful to me, because you look at the word for humankind is Adam in Hebrew, and the word for land and earth is Adamah. And you can talk about that human-centric aspect to how we understand ourselves, but I really understand it as that we were created from the earth. It's like from the dust of Adam, from Adamah came Adam, right? And so the idea is you walk through, and it gives you a sense of humility. Mm-hmm. That's like, it's impossible for us to read that quote when you walk into the farm and see a carrot grow and not say, oh my God, like, how did that, regardless of whether you believe in God or not, it's awe. That's what it is. It's awe. And I love that I've taken people and we've planted horseradish in the ground, a tiny little sliver of root. And then about a year later, we have an abundance of horseradish. And people are like, how did that happen? That is amazing. That something's gone on here. And then we get to share it with the community and put it on our Passover plate. And we eat it as community and remind ourselves of slavery and what we want social justice to look like in today's world, never forgetting what's happened to us and what we want to give to the world as well. So it's like this whole connection of the physical and the seasons. I mean, in Judaism, all the big festivals are based on seasons and harvests. It's interesting being in Sydney because they're all based on Israel, which is in the northern hemisphere. We're in the southern hemisphere. So right now we're going into the Jewish New Year, which is in 2 weeks. And Israel is going, and America is going obviously into, they're kind of shutting down. They're going into autumn and then into the winter, and we're just waking up. So it's kind of a nice time to be a Jew in Australia in spring. But yeah, that's sort of where my head's at with how I do, where I connect. You know, even when I get down every morning, we have prayers like the morning prayer, Modani, which is literally just translating to gratitude. And it's impossible not to look around and see food growing and not be immersed with endless gratitude to something. And if I can share that through like really, really old prayer and ideas, and that just links it all together even better, more meaningful.
Thank you, Mitch. It's marvellous to see the vibrancy that you came alive in talking about that wonderful place, that garden, a bit like the Garden of Eden in Paddington. And Cherie, just a marvellous start from both of you. Could we go to Nagasuri now, please?
Fine, thank you, and thank you for the contribution so far. It just fills my heart, and so I come from a different perspective. I am a practicing Buddhist. The celebration of the sanctity of all things certainly speaks to me, but also just how my faith fosters the possibility for looking after, you know, the planet Earth, our home. So in Buddhism, the principle of ahimsa, peace, is really very strong and underlies almost everything. And that's not just an inner peace, but peace for all beings. So not just human beings, but peace for all beings. And so that's a principle, but putting it into practice, of course, is for me and for all Buddhists the most important thing. You know, it's no good having a whole lot of wonderful ideals if we're not in some ways trying to work towards them, holding them as ideals, but working towards them. So the first ethical guideline or precept that we have is I undertake to abstain from harming living beings. And, you know, harming living beings certainly one becomes a vegetarian, if not a vegan. And we know what happens to the environment with meat production or fish production, fish farming. And of course, to harm living beings means that we need to look after the environment that we all live in, that we all are sustained by. So again, you know, it's fostering the planet as well as other living beings. So I very much resonate with that training principle. The second one is I undertake to abstain from taking the not given. So it's enormously broad. I mean, it's so much more than stealing material things. And I mean, certainly I understand that principle is that it's not given to us in the first world to exploit the resources of the world, thinking particularly of the fossil fuels, which we use ourselves here in Australia. But of course, we then export and the effects those sorts of things have. So with a tragic impact on many countries, many people, you know, the climate change and the rise of ocean levels. I was a Pacific historian as an academic, almost in a past life, it feels. And to know that Kiribati and Tuvalu, two low-lying atolls, are losing land. The Tuvalu people have bought land in Fiji, at highlands of Fiji, because they're losing their home, their land. So that feels very important to me. And of course, climate change will affect all future generations. So for those of us who have grandchildren, that recognition that how we live now will affect, you know, our own families, but of course all living beings. Finally, and this is not a principle, but there's a strong emphasis from the Buddha himself and the life he led of cultivating simplicity and contentment. And that is very much sort of a non-acquisitiveness. Why do we need so many possessions? Why do we need so many experiences, getting in aeroplanes and flying around, etc., etc.? And I've always loved the aphorism, live simply so others may simply live. And it feels really strong that you know, we have the opportunity to have the most incredible wealth of experiences and material goods. But, you know, what is that doing to ourselves and our own souls or our own spiritual beings? And what's it doing to the rest of the world that doesn't enjoy that? Mm-hmm. But just finally, our precepts, our ethical guidelines come in two formulations, a negative formulation, so abstain from harming something. But the positive formulation of the first precept is, with deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body, speech, and mind. And that loving kindness, the fact that we're all interconnected, you know, this dichotomy between self and other can have such tragic impact, you know, in a wider scheme of things. So many more things I could say, but, you know, as far as I'm concerned, my precepts need to be acted on, and I repeat them to myself before I meditate every morning, and I do what I can in the small ways that individually we can.
Thank you so much, Nagasuri, for reminding us so beautifully of those wonderful realities, but also the very stark realities, and how your faith is leading you and the rest of us towards a new understanding. We're just welcoming Rabbi Shamir. Shamir, welcome aboard. We'll include you. We're just addressing that key question, and we've introduced ourselves, so we'll ask you towards the end to introduce yourself and then to comment, if that would be acceptable. So that'll be after Di at the end. You can see Di here, I think. Yes, there's Di there now. So could we ask Fahimah next to share with us around that first question?
Sure. Nagasuri, I really loved what you said about the point about undertake to abstain from taking from us that is not given. It reminds me of this verse in the Quran, which is from chapter 2, verse 188. It goes, "And do not consume one another's wealth unjustly, or send it in bribery to rulers in order that they might aid you to consume a portion of the wealth of the people in sin, while you know it is unlawful." And this verse resonates with me because it speaks as a direct condemnation of the exploitative treatment of Indigenous people and culture, and also the vestiges of colonialism that's felt everywhere on earth. Yeah. So I'm Malaysian. I come from a former British colony, and I see how colonization has impacted my country in terms of the way the people relate to one another, and also the environmental devastation. So people like me come to Australia seeking a better future, but you know, we're doing so in a country that's built on colonial theft and genocide, where the ultra wealthy are still profiting of fossil fuel extraction at the expense of the traditional owners of the land. So I think because we're talking about how everything is interconnected, you know, we are of this earth. And so, you know, wherever we go, we have to make sure that we respect the way that things are, the way that, you know, everybody has a right to where they've come from, to where they live. And, you know, everybody has the right to be happy and healthy, just like everybody else in a more privileged part of the world. And kind of part of sort of this connecting the dots sort of thinking that I'm going around about is that we're so enmeshed in the system where, you know, for example, we're addicted to cheap mass-produced goods from China. And this is silencing us from speaking out against the systemic erasure of the Uyghur Muslims, because we worry about tourism, we worry about trade sanctions, but you know, we need to worry about others as well. And recently, like, I've been thinking about the sentencing of the Christchurch shooter, and it's sort of gotten me to think about the rituals of grieving and death in Islam. And I'm sort of reminded of what Mitch was saying. You know, God created humankind from the dust of the earth, and the way that Islamic burial traditions are carried out is that when we die, we are dressed in a very simple shroud, and we are buried so that we may return to the earth, we may become part of the dust. And it's the same as well in kind of like halal sort of rituals of sacrifice, where similar to what Sherry mentioned before, you know, we use every part of the animal. We make sure that the poor and the needy and families are fed first. We make sure that nothing gets wasted. And at the end, it all gets buried again to become dust, like we all will be at some point in our lives. And I'm sorry for like if this is sort of going down a bit of a morbid path, but I do really like that idea that because we return to dust and we kind of help life come back as new shoots and, you know, new fruit and vegetable. It sort of makes me think that, you know, we never really die. Thank you.
Thank you, Fahimah. It's just amazing how important these truths are for us to take on board and to help shape our national conscience and consciousness. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I think if we were going in order, we would have, yes, we'll ask Zuleyha to come next. I'll leave Di and Shamir to the end, if that's okay. So Zuleyha, even though I've got something different on my list here.
Okay, all good. So I guess, you know, when I think about our environment and ourselves, there are three sort of principles that I think are important in how we respond to our environment, and they are the potential of everything, the value of everything, and basically the interdependence of everything. So when we're talking about potential, you know, Islam teaches us that everything has great potential. So everything is, and humans, for example, are created in what we call the ahsani taqweem, in the best of forms. So it's just a matter of time for that form to realize its potential and become great. And what we see is that a lot of Muslim scholars actually use the seed analogy or the tree analogy to talk about the potential of humans. And I think this connection between a human and, you know, trees or nature is really important, because first you can visualize it. You can see the difference between a seed and a tree, and it's like, you know, the potential growth of any individual being is great. But it's also important because it connects human beings to the natural environment. So, you know, this in itself then creates empathy, or, you know, personify or creates a connection with the environment, in the sense that, you know, as individuals, as humans, we all know that, you know, we would all be pretty much devastated if we weren't able to realize our potential. And so if we are a seed and we don't get a chance to grow into our full, you know, to a full tree, then we think, well, the same goes for the environment or the habitat. You know, if they're not able to realize their potential, it would be just as devastating for them. So, you know, I think that, you know, affinity that is established between ourselves and the environment is really important, because what we want for ourselves, we want for the natural environment too. So that's the potential. The other thing is the value. Now, you know, in the Islamic tradition, everything is again seen as being valuable. And the key reason for that is everything is seen as in a way, a reflection or a manifestation of God's names. So everything in a way then becomes a reminder of God, whether it's the beauty, whether it's the balance, whether it's the shape of things, you know, the wisdom of things. So all these are all seen as like a mirror. They're mirroring, you know, based on their capacity, the names of God. So this, as a result, as I said, creates this affinity, or again connection with everything in the environment, because everything is a reminder of God. Everything is a creation of God. There's a mystic poet, Yunus Emre, who said we love the Creator because of we love the creation because of the Creator. So naturally, every creation becomes loved. And when you look at the environment from this perspective, a tree, for example, is no longer seen as a wooden skeleton, but it's seen as artwork made by God. A flower is no longer seen as this pretty entity, but it's seen as a beautiful creation, reminding the observer of the Creator's beauty. So potential and value important. The other thing is the interdependence. This is such an important part of, again, how we look at the environment. And in the Quran, actually, it mentions no living creature is there moving on earth, no bird flying on its two wings, but they are communities just like you. So the point where it says they're communities just like you positions ecosystems in the same league as human societies. So they're seen as being just as important in their communities, just as we are. And this leads, to the conclusion that there are many concurrently existing and independent ecosystems. So we know this, but it draws our attention to it. So not unlike the human society, so we have a responsibility towards humanity, but we also therefore have a responsibility towards the ecosystems and ensuring that they're not damaged, they're not destroyed. And this, you could say, is part of the general Quranic prohibition not to cause corruption on earth. So corruption on earth, or our responsibilities on earth, isn't just towards human beings and ensuring that there's a peaceful environment there, but that the ecosystem is also maintained is part of our responsibility as to not cause corruption on earth. So these three things are very important, and this is why I think faith and our worldview is important. When you start your journey in life, or you continue your journey in life with this worldview where everything is valuable, everything has great potential, and that they are communities that need to be protected, your reactions or your responses or your decision making would therefore be one that's much more cautious and careful, because you're dealing with the sacred. And just the point of spring, it's very powerful actually, because it really reminds us, it goes back to what Fahimah was saying as well, it just reminds you that, life comes out of nowhere. And it's a very good reminder, for us that, even with death, it's just a transition into a new spring, hopefully. So new life is new hope, and therefore death is a transition into a new life.
Thank you so much, Zuleyha. You've reminded us how important it is to have good eco-theology, eco-spirituality, eco-philosophy, eco-biology, etc. That these things, as I think you said, they're also interconnected. Thank you. And moving along now to Andrew, and then we'll have Di and introduce Shamir after Di.
Thanks.
Thanks.
One thing I probably should say at this point is that I think the wider, probably evangelical fundamentalist Protestant church is probably more responsible for harm to the environment than any other single religious group on earth. And that's a really horrific thing to say, considering that we're supposed to be using the same text as our foundation. And I think there's a lot of justification of things that get done wrong from that biblical text, and that happens across, it happens across all religions. We interpret things the way that we want to, and I think one of the foundations for that is in Genesis chapter 1, where it says where man is given responsibility for creation, and so many translations say subdue the earth, or these things, rule over the earth, these kind of things, and it's taken in a context that really just ends up being quite destructive, and we've got centuries and centuries of history of that shows this destructive nature that can happen when our religious traditions take us in the wrong direction. And that's one of the things that, for me, in recent years has just really struck me, that we were given a responsibility, through this creation narrative. Mankind, the highest of all evolved beings, is being given this responsibility, and all that we've done is cause destruction. And so for me, my heart in caring for our environment, the song that played at the back of the video that we started the session with, is probably, well, seems to me to be the beginning of a lot of awakening within the charismatic church, within the evangelical church, to start saying, hang on a minute, we really need to start thinking about what we're doing, and realize that this creation that we so strongly believe in is actually so precarious, and that we need to do something about it. And so, in my time working overseas, in my time since being back here in Australia, I guess I've started trying to say, hang on a minute, what can I do to stop these cycles? What can I do in my life, in my family, and in the lives of those around me? What can I do to actually say, hang on a minute, this is enough. We've done enough. We need to start changing. We need to start listening to people who actually know what they're talking about, and not just turn around and say, just try and throw our religion in and say, that this tells me to do otherwise. And so, so coming from a place of saying, no, we have this creation that we've been given stewardship over, that we should be caring for, and changing lifestyles, changing principles, changing actions to make that work. That's I guess that's how my faith tradition has led me to where I am. Not that it necessarily speaks into how I live my life, but it's certainly what shaped me to be where I am now.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for pointing out how important ecological conversion is, particularly to the Christian churches who have used that metaphor of go forth and multiply and to conquer the earth in so adversely. And we are, thank God, we're starting to re-envisage that and revisit the deep meaning of Christianity. So thank you. And we'll I think, Di, you'll probably complement that very well. So thank you, Di.
Thanks, Trish. Thanks, everyone. I keep nodding my head because I'm in agreement with so many things that people are saying, and I'm really struck by the commonality. We're all really on the same page here. I love the season of creation. I love the fact that in the Christian church, at least, we're very used to an annual calendar and cycling through different seasons, of lament and of expectation and of participating in the birth of Christ. And historically, Easter in the Northern Hemisphere coincides with the new life of creation, of spring. And so it makes a lot of sense to celebrate Easter in the Northern Hemisphere when everything else is coming to life. And of course, that's the Christian celebration of the resurrection of Christ. To me, though, being an Australian Christian, it's just so meaningful to have the season of creation through September. And as an Australian Christian, I feel really fed by the two streams of heritage to which I belong, and that is our Indigenous forebears that have cared for this land for such a long time before me, and the Jewish heritage, which so richly feeds into what's become the Christian faith, and subsequently the family of Abrahamic faiths. So it's to me, it's a really wonderful culmination of drawing those sort of dual heritages together to be the Australian church, and the Australian church at this time, in this time of crisis, of existential crisis for the other species and ecosystems and even ourselves. So the season of creation to me is a really useful prompt to help support people of faith, people of goodwill, good, regular Australian folk who haven't necessarily had that ecological conversion and don't necessarily see climate change in the foreground of their mind, don't necessarily see it as their most pressing issue for obvious reasons. And particularly with the pandemic, when we're all so separated from each other, it's hard to really imagine climate change as the most important problem when our most important problems are that we can't see our children or our families or go to school or the other concerns that we have. We may have lost our job. So to me, the season of creation offers an opportunity to bring delight and to bring joy into people's lives despite the pandemic, despite climate change. It's an opportunity for everyone, regardless of where you are politically or how concerned you normally are around climate change, or whether you're a greenie or whether you're not. It's an opportunity for all of us to really revel in what does it mean for the earth to be reborn annually in either hemisphere. For us, it's great because it's spring. As Andrew was saying, the church has a lot to answer for in terms of environmental degradation, colonialism, those philosophies that position white male thinking over everyone else in their thinking and their practice. And so as an eco-theologian, just sort of trying to pull those things apart, and within the church, to remind the church that actually our roots are very much about that relationality that everyone has spoken about, that not only are we communities of people, but each of us are a community of species walking around within ourselves. If you think about the rest of the flora that live on our skin and in our gut, we're already a community before we even start. And my gut bacteria doesn't recognize that it's necessarily part of something bigger, in the same way that a lot of us don't recognize that we're part of this one big biosphere, which is all of creation. So within the Christian church, we have a system of reading through the scriptures and praying through the scriptures in this annual routine. But in the season of creation, those scriptures and those prayers turn toward 4 themes of who is my neighbour, and then thinking about land, water and air through the month of September, and culminating then with the blessing of the creatures or the pets, on the day that we celebrate for St. Francis. So to me, it's a great opportunity to be inclusive of all sorts of ways that Christians and others have understood our relationship with the rest of creation. It's an opportunity to be very positive and to intervene in terms of planting trees and maybe being more critical of our own practices, using plastic. It's an opportunity for churches to critique the way they position themselves in the community and endeavour to be more outward looking. So for me, all these things come together in this season, and it reminds us again that this Western philosophical notion of separating the mind and reason and this cognitive approach to the way we read the scriptures or the way we understand Christian faith really is just so foolish, and such a brief moment in time when you think of the long history of people engaging in the world in a very physical way, in the soil itself, Adam from Adama, but humans from Homus, really. It's taking apart that Western philosophical division of body and soul, and reminding us that actually it's in the connection that we are closest to God.
Thank you, Di, for helping us to explore the rich potential of the season of creation in overcoming that dualism that many of us have pointed to. And lastly, but by no means least, we welcome Shamir for being with us And could you unmute yourself, please, Shamir?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, if you'd like to just tell us a bit about yourself by way of introduction, and then you might like to lead on to some kind of response you'd wish to make to that question around the sacredness of creation, the seasons, and what part your faith might have in influencing those concepts.
So, I appreciate the invitation to participate today with everyone. Can you hear me all right? Well, at least the other panelists can, but the 80 others joining from away. I will assume so. My name is Shamir. I grew up in South Africa. I moved to America when I was young, spent time in lots of different places, and ended up marrying an Australian, luckily, and coming here about 15 years ago. And I work at, I'm a rabbi of a congregation in Melbourne, and also am chaplain at a Jewish day school called Mount Scopus. And I wanted to share some general thoughts, is that all right, about my perspective on Judaism's take on the environment, and then specifically about the seasons, if that's okay. So I also want to apologize. I was actually busy teaching for the first part of this, and I missed everyone's introduction. But I do appreciate everything that I've heard, and I'm not at all surprised how much we all share in common. Thank God, literally, for that. So I suppose I would start by saying the responsibility of our religion, or any religion, or the truth is any ideologically driven mass movement, is to step back from the daily goings on of society and to take a big picture look at what's happening and where are we going and what should we be doing. And so I appreciate in that respect that for me, one of the big picture goals of Judaism is that we try to live life with a sense of balance. And I was very drawn to what Andrew was speaking about in terms of the biblical narrative, the chapter 1 of Genesis, speaking about subduing the world and being at the center, or the top of the pyramid, as it were. And I think that's an extremely important text that to talk about for two reasons. One is it's only half of the story. There are two differing, and many would argue contradictory stories of creation in chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis, which I think are very, very important to this issue. The second chapter, the story of the Garden of Eden, is all about mankind's relationship to the earth, of being one of la'ovda u'lashomra, to serve and to protect the earth, to guard and to serve the earth, the garden, as it were. So, you know, two very different sides of the same coin, of humanity's relationship to the world, is on the one hand this sense of subjugation, subduing it, on the other hand serving it. I mean, you couldn't have greater polar opposites. And the truth is, the language that in Hebrew that describes that word that Andrew focused on, of subduing the earth, lirdot, is a very unique word in Hebrew. And there's a beautiful commentary that says that word is related to the Hebrew word for to descend, which is quite different from subduing. And the way the text, that old text explains it, that commentary explains this, is, you know, if we stand on the top of the pyramid and control, if you will, the world around us, if we do that in a enlightened and sustainable and appropriate and respectful manner, one that doesn't ignore the fact that we're also the gardeners, not just the controllers. If we do it in the appropriate way, then we will continue to have the opportunity to be the most powerful beings, as it were, on the planet. But if we don't do it in a sustainable and appropriate way, says this text from 1,000 years ago, then we will laredet, we will descend, and the world will dominate us. And so I put it to us to think about, where are we in that calculus? Are we living in a way that represents with dignity and glory and majesty, looking after the world around us, using it in a way that's sustainable for our needs, but taking care of it? Or are we struggling to deal with it in a way that we're feeling sort of descending underneath it and being swallowed up by it? And it's really up to us in terms of how we choose to do this. It makes sense that the people with the entities with the greatest abilities in this world are the ones that have the greatest responsibility for taking care of it. And I might share a beautiful midrash, also a text from several thousand years ago, that speaks about how God, it has this image of God taking mankind through the world on a guided tour of the world and saying, look how majestic this world is that I've created. It's there for you to use, but don't destroy any of it. Don't diminish it, because if you do, then who's going to be around to take care of it and to repair it? Meaning, we have, on the one sense, a wonder with which we approach the world. It's just such an amazing garden that we are privileged to be able to be a part of and to utilize for our needs. On the other hand, we have to recognize that given our unique intellectual and other abilities, who else is going to look after the world if not us? I mean, the buck stops with us, right? We have the responsibility to do that. So balance, I think, is the key here. Living life with a sense of balance. And it's not about, and balance doesn't mean having a tepid or muted response. If you step back in your big picture, look at the world and where we are and how we're relating to everything, gives you a sense that we're in fairly desperate times. If you recognize that this is a climate emergency around us, and that when we look at the number of species that are disappearing around us, and the way that we're physically changing the makeup of the world in which we live in a way that's never happened before on such a grand scale, we recognize it isn't business as usual, and therefore a balanced approach, a reasoned approach, requires extreme action at this moment in junction. If everything was balanced, then we would be much more subdued in our response. But when things are as desperate as they are, desperate at times that we find ourselves in, then we really need very intense and coordinated interfaith action to make that difference. Now, I believe, Trish, I was supposed to speak a little bit about the seasons. There's so much that's similar to what our friends have shared this morning, starting with Sherry and going on to everyone else who spoke, that sense of an appreciation for that we are landed beings, that we appreciate the changing of the seasons and the times, and it affects our prayers and it affects our rituals, and that we celebrate New Year's for trees, because we acknowledge that it's not just we that celebrate the gift of our existence, and that there's so much to say. The last thing I'll say about that is our festival of Passover, of Pesach, which for us is the embodiment of our birth as a nation, the transition from being a family to a nation, that we as a Jewish nation were born, as it were, through the Passover festival. And that time, our entire annual calendar is created and set up such that we always celebrate the Passover in springtime, because that's when the world is being recreated. So very similar to what Di was saying, but with a slightly different twist, and one that appreciates in both of, and in fact in all our traditions, that if we want to be real, we have to really connect to our source, to our physical source, to the Mother Earth, to really understand who we are and where we should be going.
Thank you, Shamir, and also for pointing out to us the importance of interpretation of our faith and our scriptures in order to make sense of the world that we live in, and how carefully rooted in those interpretations we need to be, and not accept those old mindsets that we may have interpreted mistakenly. Now, Bernard, I'm wondering if you and Claire would think it's a good idea if, instead of addressing our other questions, we move towards open questions now, because we are running short of time, aren't we? So have we got questions from the people who are listening? We can't see them, that's the trouble.
No, I have the questions written down, and I've got 3 questions here, but probably the most poignant one is how do we take our collective messages, which are so much in tune with each other, to the wider world? How do we accelerate the spread of what we think is our good news? How do we take this beyond the boundaries of our own faith into the secular society?
One of our speakers mentioned an association of faiths for ecology. Would anyone like to comment in response to that?
Fahimah, you talked about ARC. I'm certainly a member of ARC, but I get a sense you know more about it than I do. Would you like to say something about it?
Yes, of course. So I guess the way that, so ARC is the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change, and we're sort of approaching kind of this, having a conversation with the wider public through kind of programs that promote lifestyle and cultural change. And we also have a line of work that focuses on political and structural action. And I think there is, like, to me, it exists as part of a continuum, because when you start taking, lifestyle actions, for example, trying to be kinder to the earth and eating less meat, that then sort of fosters this, first of all, like you're fostering this communal idea that by eating together, you can help heal the world. And then that becomes a catalyst for working on taking on bigger projects with like a wider and more diverse group of people. And I feel incredibly lucky to be able to have my colleagues at ARC who come from so many different faiths and life experiences and cultural background, to be able to then cultivate this really rich kind of pool of people who are passionate and active. And I think the cultivation of people to become politically active is important, because like my concern is that it's great to have thoughts and prayers and reflect on our scriptures and eat less meat, but like Shamir was saying before, the balance we need to take, I believe we need to take more aggressive action. Aggressive, not in a way that's like scary, but sort of like that drives straight to the heart of the problem, which is massive structural inequalities that is going to affect our life, our environment, and the way our future generations live. And I think, yeah, it is now's the time to encourage everybody to find a commonality, so that we can sort of take stronger action for a safer climate.
And ARC, it does have a website and has a newsletter. Does it link with any government agencies or so-called secular agencies, as well as interfaith agencies, Fahimah?
So we are I think we're a registered charity, and we do have allies from across the climate and ecological movement. So and a lot of us have wear multiple hats and hijabs. So we use that as part of this sort of pool of resources, in that we are connected to people from secular and government and spiritual circles to enrich how we formulate our strategies. But we sort of are linked very closely internationally as well with Green Faith International, and that allows us to sort of take on really ambitious projects. Like, for example, the G20 summit is happening in November, and we are in the process of coming up with a strategy to link faith communities around the world to assert some pressure on the G20 to push for a clean recovery from COVID.
That's marvellous news. The Global Catholic Climate Movement also has a presence at those global conferences that the UN runs from time to time. Bernard?
Just two things. You also have the Faith Ecology Network that Dan Lanyon's involved in, with some of our people on a face on screen might be involved in as well. I see Di nodding. We also, in our 2:00 session this afternoon, Ross Garno addresses the same sort of issue. And he has a new book coming out. He moved up to Barcaldine to get Escape Victoria for winter, and he started a new book. So his first book was Superpower, which was launched in October last year, talking about a renewable recovery. But now he's written a book about a COVID economic recovery, and which cares for the common home, but also cares for the common good. He doesn't answer too many questions of that because he wants you to buy his book. But that book is called Reset, and that'll be coming out very soon after the COVID. And the other one is that it's 5 years since Pope Francis launched Laudato Si. There is another encyclical coming out on October the 4th, St. Francis' feast day, and it is focusing on an economic recovery, really considering the way we do business now, post-COVID, but also 5 years into the implementation of Laudato Si. So there's lots of convergence of thought at a global level from economists, from faith, and ARC is a great organisation that I put your full support, because they can really do really good political engagement. And it's really, really important to have broad alignment and allegiance in this space and to back each other's efforts. We don't know which needle we get through and prick the politician. But we do know that if there's a lot of needles out there, a bed of nails is going to make an impression at some point in time.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have a comment around how this faith perspective that we've been sharing, these principles, spiritual principles, can be made influential in the public square or can be taken to the public square? Anyone like to comment further on that? Yes, Zuleyha.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to work, so that we talked about collaborating between faiths, which is really, really important because, when you put people of different faiths together, it's a majority population of the world, let's just say. So that's really important, and it's important to work with the government and politicians, but I also think it's important to work with scientists. And that's an area that we need more collaboration with. We're pretty much saying the same thing. The sad thing is sometimes the minority who are allowed get their voice, and it suggests like science and faith do not go hand in hand. But we all know that's not really the case. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We're aware of global warming. We're aware of deforestation and so many other issues. So, I mean, in a way, I guess science is providing the data, and we're providing, as adherents of a faith, the meaning and the perspective to support what science is saying. So I really think that's very important too. So I guess there's many collaborations as we can have. Call it networking, the louder or stronger the voice will be.
When Tim Costello talked to the Prime Minister recently, he was telling me that he was most surprised was 186 organisations signed up to a campaign called End COVID for All. And in that presentation, he noted a prayer that the Prime Minister was involved in. He was quite devout in his attendance to the prayer. And the prayer was about caring for creation. And he said to me, he noted that the Prime Minister did pay that due homage and respect. And his impression was, yes, he believes in climate change, but politically, he's wedged.
Yeah. Well, we do have to pray and advocate both, don't we? And study and learn and share. Shamir.
I just wanted to add that, of course, I agree with everything that's spoken about and taking nothing away from that. But I think in addition, sometimes the best thing we can do for the external is to shore up the internal. And I've often marveled at some of the biggest challenges to us as people of faith isn't in terms of between different faiths, but within our faiths and the different voices within our faiths. And If we as people can, who are concerned about the environment, committed to the environment, to understand the connection between our faiths and the environment, if we spend the time that's needed to work within our own communities, then it's not just us as the segment of our faith community that's environmentally aware, then it becomes a much greater part of our faith community that becomes activists in this regard. So I think it's also important to keep up that kind of education, clarification of traditions and justifications from our own traditions, and that's invaluable, not just externally but also internally, because then it brings more people on side to have that impact.
Yeah, I often think that too, Shamir, that in our faith, I'm a Catholic, and we have a global network, and we're quite huge in terms of numbers. If we could get every parish and every diocese in tune with Laudato Si and Pope Francis, it would be a force to be reckoned with. So we've got a lot of work to do. We're very anthropocentric. We're not creation-centered nearly enough. So we've got a lot of work to do, I agree. Anybody else who's got something on your mind you'd like to share, because we just have a couple of minutes.
Maybe I can.
Sure.
I'm really touched by the correlation between all the different faiths, and how they all melt so beautifully and all have the basic thing, that we come from the earth and we return to the earth, that we are one, and I think, and even the similar for Aboriginal people, the life and death, and I think it's wonderful, and I know that the Catholic Church are doing a lot of things. I'm on a Laudato Si working group to try and bring the church up to date and work on the climate change things, which I think that it's really important. I was watching a program, I think it was on the weekend, and they were saying Australia is going to have the first refugees from their land being taken, just like the Fijians. We've got a lot of little islands that are dotted up the coast, at the east coast of Australia, that are in dire straits. I know even just where my father comes from, in Yarrabah in Cairns. I was up there last year, and one of my cousins said, "Gee, see that great big rock there that was like the size of me?" And she said, "When I was little, that rock was this big out of the soil, and now it's a giant." And you can see how the ocean's eroding the beach. It's getting, the beach is getting further and further inland. And so, what are we going to do when we have all these people that are refugees in the world because their communities have been flooded through climate change? It's something that we need to think about now, and work on it collectively, as you said, Shamir, in our different faiths. I think all faiths are looking at what's happening, and so I think if we all do that little bit of work in our own communities, and try and spread that word and share how important it is to take care of our common home, hopefully we can do some things well. We've seen that great little girl from overseas, Greta. She's called the world to attention. But I must say, even with this COVID, when it first began, I remember thinking the world's taking a big breath. It's breathing, and the animals are returning, and the sky in China is clearing, the sky in India is clearing from the smog. What a beautiful thing. Mother Earth should be, I'm sure she's very grateful. So, out of bad, sometimes good things do happen.
And Cherie, it's very appropriate, I think, that one of our first peoples would have the last word. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone. You've just been such a rich tapestry of sharing this morning, like the colours in the rainbow, that covenant rainbow between God and humanity. Well done. We are so grateful that you are able to be here. Bernard, you might like to have the last word.
Thank you very much, Trish, and thank you very much, Trish, for hosting today's session. Claire, can we just flick to the last slide, and I'll just position this in the orientation. I love seeing Mitch out in the field there. Hi, Mitch. We're watching you around the farm while we're listening to everybody else.
I'm so sorry, I forgot. Sorry.
No. This is good.
He's slip-slopping and slapping.
Yeah.
It's a very hot day. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a quick orientation. This afternoon, we're running into the what can we do about all these issues? And so we've got 3 sessions starting on finance and economics. And this is a pre-recorded session with Ross Garno, hosted by Tim Buckley, and I'll be hosting this recorded session. Please join us if you're free. If not, watch the recording later. And please join us for any other sessions that you're able to be a part of as part of the audience. Thank you again on behalf of Catholic Earth Care. We just see Catholic Earth Care as a meeting place for everybody. And everyone has a shared responsibility to deal with these issues, and hope to see you in the other forums like ARC and FEN going forward. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.